Hey people, Math here. Today, we're going to be talking about some roguelikes. Wait, no, this is not that channel. I'm going to have to step in here and say, actually, when people nowadays think of a roguelike, they think of blitzing through caverns in Dead Cells, or kicking it with paraplegic gods in Hades 2. Now, I love these games to the core, but any roguelike fan worth their salt will be quick to point out that these aren't actual roguelike games. To prove that point, we can put Risk of Rain 2 side by side with the original Rogue, and yeah, these games are nothing alike. Hence why most of these games have branched off into their own subgenre called roguelites, retaining the rogue staples like permadeath and procedurally generated environments while changing up the moment-to-moment gameplay to dip the games into other genres. If you don't know what a roguelike or a roguelite is, then I'm gonna lazily include a snippet from my Noita video. You start off with a default set of equipment, you progress through these areas, you pick up certain items that give you certain buffs or debuffs that you have to tailor your playstyle towards, you defeat the area boss and rinse and repeat until you either gain enough items to gain the power of an Olympian god and cocky willy the final boss, or you die. Should you die, you normally lose all of the items and go straight back to the start of the game, with some games giving you permanent upgrades to make subsequent runs less tedious. Thanks, younger me. Now, roguelike games are fantastic. In fact, they're one of my favorite gaming genres of all time, but many of them are balanced in a way that make progression consistent. Normally at the beginning of these roguelike games, you die a bunch at the start, but as you progress throughout the game, you eventually get overpowered enough that you can speedrun through multiple game cycles. But this is not the case with many of the traditional roguelike games. Do you like numbers flooding your screen? Do you like creating busted builds right at the start of the game? Do you like amassing an army of ants to fight for you while you shop for useless Chinese knickknacks on Temu? If the answer to any of those questions is yes, then I have a game for you that could serve as a perfect introduction to the OG roguelike genre. This is Path of Achra, or Path of Achra. Achra? Honestly don't know how to pronounce this word, but this is the game. Path of Achra just released into 1.0 and is still being updated by a solo developer. Now, look, you wanna laugh. I know you do. This game looks as though a calculator conceived a baby with Minesweeper and proceeded to drop it on its head a few times. But if you give the game a chance like I did, then you'll discover that you are about to open Pandora's box to unlimited build creativity and a cacophony of roguelike chaos. Starting the game takes you straight to your run options. You choose a culture, which is essentially your race, and then your class, which already allows for plenty of combinations. You can be a Tengu monk, clobbering your way through zones with your electrifying kung fu skills, or a skeleton necromancer, flooding the battlefield with minions. Where it gets even crazier is with your character's chosen religion. You have 3 prayers that you can use in the field that serve as active abilities, normally an action that heals you or applies one of many effects on you or your enemies. Your first prayer is available at the start, while the other 2 are eventually unlocked as you level up, and these prayers will often play off of each other. Many religions have one prayer recharge other prayers under certain conditions, which can be easily abused on many builds, as we'll see later. After selecting your options, you get right into clearing out zones full of baddies. But before you do, you might want to assign your attribute point and distribute your starting skill points. You have an overwhelming list of skills that can drastically affect your playstyle. The martial skills are on the left, which affect everything physical like armor, blocking, accuracy, dodging, melee damage, etc., and everything else being your elemental skills. You can mix and match these skills at your own leisure, and you may even be able to unlock a prestige skill, which are basically advanced classes you can opt into if you have enough skill points invested in different trees. Mixing the fire and martial trees can let you unlock the Flame Knight, for example, who can crank out some serious DPS. Other prestige skills can be unlocked by having specific equipment, like different visages that can transform you into a lizard man, an beast, and many more. As you begin clearing out zones, you'll pick up various armor pieces that will also provide you with many effects. So let's pause real quick. You get effects from your race, your class, your religion, your skills, and your equipment, and all of these effects synergize with each other to amplify or add new effects. Dear God. Path of Achra uses a turn-based action system, and I put that in quotes because it's so fast and frenetic that you'll rarely notice you're taking turns to begin with. Everything in the game operates off game turns, which are affected by your speed stat. Increasing your speed stat will allow you to do more actions before a game turn, which you can use to your benefit. For example, damage over time debuffs like Poison and Scorch will only proc each game turn, so if you're quick enough, you can clear out a whole room before that DOT procs. Game turns are normally initiated with a simple left click and affect nearly every action, including moving, attacking, praying, or simply standing still. These actions will trigger different effects depending on your build setup, so you can formulate your build around just about anything that tickles your fancy. Magic staves usually shine when you're standing still, most melee weapons thrive in close quarters, and niche weapons like claws are best used on the move, dancing between your opponents and bombarding them with an onslaught of slashes. Defeating enemies and progressing to new zones will grant you glory, experience points that level up your character's attributes and provide you with skill points. So basically, the majority of the gameplay loop is starting off a build, running through dungeons, killing monsters, leveling up, and using your attribute and skill points to funnel into your build. After clearing a zone, you'll get the choice of where you want to go next, with a detailed description of the monsters and loot you'll get from that zone. Tank builds would be wise to avoid any acidic creature, as their corrosion debuff will melt through your armor, leaving you nice and squishy, so that's where you would find that kind of monster. Any piece of gear you don't want can be sacrificed to power up the same type of gear you have equipped. Let's say you found a helmet that boosts lightning damage, but you're wearing a flame helmet that's better suited for your AoE fire build. You can sacrifice that lightning helmet to boost the stats of your flame helmet, so it can compete with other helmets you'll pick up later in the run. You ideally want to have as many effects that aid your build as possible, and this is where the game gets absolutely nuts. Remember my Noita video where I mentioned the wand system and how you could put in different triggers and modifiers in your wand to affect the different spells? That was just for the wands. Now imagine that happening with every single action you take. You'll quickly notice there's an action log that details everything that happens during a game turn, and this thing fills up so fast that it looks like your PC is being hacked into by a Russian bot. Taking a step will activate an effect. You'll attack an enemy and trigger an effect. When the enemy dies, it triggers an AoE effect, and when that effect hits another adjacent enemy, it triggers another effect. It is complete pandemonium. Similar to my Noita video, simply explaining this shit to you guys doesn't really do this game justice, so I'm going to share some of the builds I use so you guys can get an idea of what you guys can do. One of the builds I used when I started Path of Achra is a prayer focused build. This build uses the Aishtidar culture with the Humbaba religion. I'm sorry, I'm gonna have a hard time pronouncing half of this shit. The Humbaba religion gives me access to prayers that give me stacks of blood rage, which is basically lifesteal. The first prayer that gives me blood rage recharges upon killing an enemy, which pairs nicely with the culture I chose, which damages enemies upon activating a prayer, allowing me to give myself blood rage while also damaging or even killing my enemies. Blood rage gives 5 health every hit per stack, and I would leave zones with around 104 stacks, meaning I was healing for 520 health every single hit. I paired this with the Jade Disc Blade, which grants armor for every effect stack on my character, and I also threw in a golden helmet that applies stacks of Inflame, which increases my damage as long as I'm not moving. The class and skill set really could have been anything, but I went with Myrmidon just because it was a newly unlocked class at the time. But it does block distant opponents much better, making this a great ranged character. I go through zones blasting enemies with my prayers, and if my health gets low, I just chuck a spear at someone and instantly heal myself to 100%. I'd say Templar would probably be the better option due to the buffs the class gets upon using a prayer, but like every build, this is all experimental and you're free to fuck around with this as much as you want. Here's a fun Necromancer build you can try. The Valor culture, which causes allies to deal death damage, paired with the Amir class, which summons nomads every floor, and topped off with the Formus deity, which summons a horde of ants whenever enemies are alive during a game turn, with the different prayers summoning higher tiered ants at will. Since allies deal death damage, I spec hard into the death tree, using skills like Necromancy that further increases the death damage, and the Cursed Flesh skill, which heals me whenever an enemy dies. This build also utilizes the Death Knight Prestige skill, which gives me armor and health every time an enemy or ally dies on the battlefield. I also fucked around a bit and picked up a pair of ice gloves to spawn living ice, and a serpent fetish that summons serpents. All my attribute points were dumped into willpower to increase the damage of my minions, and so many minions can be summoned that at one point every single tile of the floor was occupied by a minion. This is very much so a chill back and let the game play itself kind of build. One of my favorite runs was an underdog goblin build. Goblins get a racial bonus that increases their max life for every piece of gear that I sacrifice. This goblin is also an abdi, a warrior that upgrades the weapon in their dominant hand every level up and does a big hit for every fully charged prayer. This goblin is also devoted to Apophis, a serpent god that revels in chaos. Leveling up will always provide me 1 point in strength, allowing me to use my attribute point on a different stat like vigor while still getting stronger. This comes with the caveat of having 7% of my total health being damaged every time I take a hit. Early game becomes really difficult with this build, but this goblin gets fucking bricked as the run progresses, to the point where I achieved a max hit of over 100,000 damage. This build uses a skill that gives me armor for every empty armor slot. I'm not even going to try to pronounce this fucking skill, and every piece of armor I picked up would be sacrificed to boost my stats. Because goblins are pretty squishy, I also stuck with ranged combat and spec'd into the fire tree for some self-healing and crowd control potential. Now this game may seem a bit complicated, but trust me, if you pay attention for just a little bit, you can slap together a build that will ultimately lead to you just pressing left click and obliterating the entire floor. Prayers can be incredibly helpful to get you out of hairy situations, and you can use the floor layout to your advantage. Melee builds can turn battles into 300 by just tucking themselves between two walls, hacking through monsters one at a time as they try to maneuver through your choke points. If this still looks daunting to you, then don't worry, as pressing or holding the tab key literally lets the game grab the reins and make the best move for you, turning the game into a pseudo auto battler. Every ability, effect, and mechanic is clearly explained through tooltips, and the entire game can be played with only a mouse or only a keyboard, leaving your other hand open to engage in more fun activities like drinking a cold beverage, playing a modern metalcore riff, or, most importantly, you can read your Bible.
What did you think of it?
I normally brush these kinds of games off because of the turn-based combat and the archaic graphics, but the intuitive controls and the sheer number of build options kept me hooked and kept me coming back. The only nitpicks I have are with the limited music tracks, but the music that's there is still quite good. I'd say just throw on some dungeon synth and you're all set. If I piqued your interest, then go grab this game on Steam. It's $10 outside of sales and provides a ton of content to make every dollar worth it. If that's too much for you, you can also check out the free demo, which provides a sizable amount of content, though it's not as fleshed out as the full version is. The one developer for this game is still pumping out content and updates after the game's 1.0 launch, and seems very passionate about improving the experience. And if you're watching this, Ulfsire, maybe we could get some Steam Deck verification? And yes, I'm using my Steam Deck as my script because my printer ran out of ink and I didn't want to go get ink. So what'd you guys think of the video? Are you interested in getting Path of Achra? Do you have an amazing build that got you through multiple game cycles? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about this. If you like the music that I used throughout this video, especially the one that I used for that little bit where I was playing the guitar one-handed, that is actually my own solo metalcore project. I'm going to provide a link to that too so you can check out my music. I'm currently working on an album, but I don't really know when I'm going to release it. So thank you guys for the support, thank you guys for liking, subscribing, and please check out Path of Achra. See you.